The summer of 1974 was so hot in Birmingham that the tar on Red Mountain bubbled like black gravy. But inside the old limestone courthouse, they were about to take an 8-year-old little girl away from the only mama she'd ever known. And nobody saw it coming. Imagine this. A silver-haired woman, 61 years old, hands that still trembled when she pressed her husband's black judge's robe every morning, is about to lose everything she has left on God's green earth because the man she loved for 38 years decided she was suddenly too old and too crazy to raise their granddaughter. Imagine the whole town believing him. Imagine the gavel already lifted. Before we continue, take a moment to share where you're listening from and subscribe to the Ageless Bold Stories channel. I truly love seeing our stories reach across so many places and hearts. Together we're creating a space where every season of life still holds its own wonder, its own turning point. Now, let's ease ourselves back into the story. Let me take you back to a Thursday in late October when the air smelled like wood smoke and butter beans. Maggie Whitfield was on the wide back porch of the big brick house on Red Mountain, the one with the white columns and the swing that creaked like it was singing hymns. She wore a faded cotton dress the color of creek water, her silver hair twisted up with 2 bobby pins, the way she'd done since 1948. A bowl of fresh snapped butter beans sat in her lap, and the rhythmic shuck, shuck, shuck of the hulls hitting the newspaper was the only sound in the whole quiet world. Across the yard, the pecan trees dropped their first gold leaves, and every now and then Maggie hummed an old shape note hymn under her breath, just loud enough for the cardinals to hear. Folks driving up the mountain slowed their Buicks just to wave. "There's Miss Maggie," they'd say, still pretty as the day Judge Raymond carried her over that threshold. Everybody in Jefferson County knew Maggie Whitfield baked the best coconut cake at the Baptist Fellowship suppers, that she kept a jar of peppermints in her purse for every child who walked into court scared, and that she had raised little Becca all by herself since the night their Caroline was killed on I-59 6 years ago. Maggie was Birmingham's quiet saint, the soft place everybody landed. That afternoon, the screen door squeaked and a deputy in a tan uniform stepped out, hat in his hand like he was at a funeral. Maggie looked up, smiling the way she always did. "Afternoon, Tommy Lee. You want some sweet tea?" Tommy Lee couldn't meet her eyes. "Miss Maggie, I'm real sorry, ma'am. Judge Whitfield had me serve these." He held out a thick brown envelope with the county seal on it. Maggie wiped her hands on the apron tied around her waist, took the envelope, and the smile never left her face until she slid the papers out. The first line hit her like a slap. Petition for divorce and custody. Her own husband, her Raymond, was asking the court to declare her senile, neglectful, unfit. He wanted the house, the savings, the pension, everything they'd built together. And worst of all, he wanted Becca, their granddaughter. The little girl asleep upstairs right that minute with her thumb in her mouth and her rag doll tucked under her chin. Maggie's breath caught so hard the butterbean bowl tipped and beans scattered across the porch like green hail. She read it again, slower, the words swimming. Emotionally unstable, no longer capable. Best interest of the minor child. The deputy shifted from foot to foot. "Miss Maggie, I surely am sorry." She tried to answer, but her throat closed up. All she could do was sink down onto the top step, the papers fluttering in her lap like wounded birds. 38 years of ironing his shirts, of standing behind him at every election, of burying their only daughter alone while he sat on the bench. 38 years, and now he called her crazy. Old, worthless. A breeze lifted the corner of the top page and Maggie saw Raymond's signature, bold and black as always. Right beside it was a second signature she didn't recognize at first. Dr. Lillian Carver, PhD. The name felt like ice water down her spine. Upstairs, a small voice called, sleepy and sweet, "Grammy? I had a dream about Mama." Maggie pressed the paper's Toro to her chest so Becca wouldn't see, forced the smile back onto her face, and somehow answered, "Coming, baby." But inside, something cracked wide open. The saint on the porch was still smiling for the neighbors, still waving at passing cars. But the woman holding those divorce papers knew, with a sick, sinking certainty, that by Monday morning the whole town was going to watch them take her grandchild away. And nobody had any idea what that little girl asleep upstairs had hidden under her bed. Tommy Lee stood there a minute longer, hat turning in his hands like he wanted to say something that might fix it. Finally, he just whispered, "I'll be praying for you, Miss Maggie," and walked back down the steps with his shoulders bowed lower than when he came. Maggie stayed on that top step until the sun slid behind Vulcan's torch and the butterbeans went cold on the planks. When Becca padded out barefoot in her nightgown, asking for water, Maggie folded the papers small enough to hide in her apron pocket, kissed the top of that red head, and carried her back to bed like nothing in the world had changed, but the papers burned against her hip the rest of the night. Friday morning came in grey and drizzly. Raymond never came home Thursday night, said he had a late docket. So Maggie did what she'd done every weekday for 38 years. She laid out his starched white shirt, his black robe, his polished shoes, and set a pot of coffee on for a man who wasn't there. Old habits die harder than hearts, I guess. At 8 o'clock, sharp, the phone rang. Maggie's hand shook so bad she nearly dropped the receiver. "Margaret." Raymond's voice was courtroom cold. "You've been served. My attorney advises you not to contest. It'll only make things uglier for the child." The child, not our Becca, not even Rebecca. Just the child, like she was evidence on a table. Maggie swallowed twice before she could speak. "Raymond, we buried Caroline together. You held that baby the day she was born. How can you—" "Sentiment has no place in family court. Margaret, Dr. Carver's report is thorough. The hearing is Monday at 10. Be there, or the judge will rule in absentia." Click. The line went dead. She stood in the kitchen, gripping that old wall phone until her knuckles went white. Then she did the only thing she knew to do when the world tilted. She started cooking. Biscuits from scratch, sausage gravy thick enough to stand a spoon in, a pound cake for the neighbors, who would surely start showing up once word got out. Her hands moved on muscle memory while her mind screamed. By noon, the beauty shop on Highland Avenue was buzzing. By 2 o'clock, the ladies at the Piggly Wiggly were whispering behind their carts. By 4, the church phone tree had lit up like Christmas. Everybody meant well, but every "I'm so sorry" and "I just can't believe it" felt like another nail. Maggie kept smiling that same soft smile, thanking folks, accepting casseroles she'd never eat. Only when the last car pulled away did she lock the front door, lean her back against it, and let the first sob rip out of her. Quiet, of course, because Becca was colouring in the parlour and little pitchers have big ears. Saturday she tried to find a lawyer. The 2 men in town who handled family cases both apologized real gentle-like. "Judge Whitfield's been real good to my firm over the years, Miss Maggie. I'm afraid there's a conflict." The legal aid office downtown told her they were booked solid until spring. She hung up the phone with no money, no representation, and a hearing in 48 hours that would decide whether Becca stayed or got handed over to a grandfather who hadn't tucked her in once since the funeral. That night she sat on the edge of Becca's bed long after the child was asleep. Moonlight striped across the quilt their Caroline had pieced when she was pregnant. Becca's little chest rose and fell, thumb in her mouth the way it had been since she was 2. Maggie brushed a curl off the damp forehead and whispered, "I won't let him take you, baby. I swear on your mama's grave." But in the dark, doubt crept in like chimney smoke. Dr. Lillian Carver's name was on half the court orders in 3 counties. Folks said she could convince a jury the sky was green. And Raymond sat on the bench for 25 years. He knew every judge, every trick. Maggie was just an old woman with flour on her apron and no proof of anything. Sunday, the preacher prayed over her in front of the whole congregation. Half the ladies dabbed their eyes. The other half stared like they were already at the funeral. When the organ started, Blessed Assurance, Maggie stood straight, sang every word, and felt the papers still folded in her pocketbook, like a loaded gun against her side. Monday morning, she dressed Becca in the yellow dress with the smocking Caroline had sewn the Christmas before she died. She braided those red curls tight, kissed the part, and told her, "We're going downtown to see Papa's courthouse. You be real good for Grammy here." Becca nodded solemn, clutching the rag doll that still smelled faintly of Caroline's white shoulders perfume. Maggie slipped on her Sunday hat, navy straw with the little veil, and the gloves she hadn't worn since the governor's inauguration. She looked every bit the dignified judge's wife one last time, because when that gavel fell tomorrow, the whole town was going to find out whether love or law won, and not a soul in Birmingham, not even Maggie herself, knew that 8-year-old Becca had spent the last 2 nights wide awake under her covers, pressing record on something hidden beneath her bed that was about to burn the whole lie to the ground. The Monday morning of the hearing broke clear and cool, the kind of October day that makes you think the world is still kind. Maggie held Becca's hand tight as they walked up the wide limestone steps of the Jefferson County Courthouse. The building smelled like old wood and floor wax and secrets. Cameras flashed. The Birmingham News had already smelled blood in the water. Inside the gallery was standing room only. Church ladies in Sunday hats, lawyers pretending they weren't there to watch the show, even a couple of deputy sheriffs who'd drawn the short straw to keep order. Maggie felt every eye land on her like a weight. She kept her chin high, the navy veil brushing her cheeks, and led Becca to the front bench like they were walking into Wednesday night prayer meeting instead of a public hanging. Raymond was already at the plaintiff's table in a charcoal suit sharp enough to cut glass. He didn't stand when they passed, didn't look at Becca once, just adjusted his cufflinks and stared straight ahead like a man waiting for a verdict he'd already bought. Dr. Lillian Carver sat beside him, 39 going on 25, honey blonde hair swept up, legs crossed in a skirt, shorter than any professional woman had a right to wear in 1974. She gave Maggie the tiniest smile, the kind you give a stray dog you're about to have put down. The judge, Judge Harlan Buddy, McElroy, Raymond's fishing buddy since the war, took the bench and the gavel cracked like a starter pistol. No jury, just him. One old man deciding whether another old man could strip his wife of everything, because she'd gotten too old to be useful. Buddy cleared his throat. This is the matter of Whitfield versus Whitfield. Petition for divorce and change of custody. Plaintiff may call his first witness. Raymond's lawyer, a slick young thing from Montgomery, stood up. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Dr. Lillian Carver. That's when Maggie felt the first cold twist in her stomach that told her this was worse than she'd feared. Lillian glided to the stand like she was walking a runway, swore on the Bible with 2 manicured fingers, and settled into the witness chair like it was a throne. The bailiff handed her a thick folder, official-looking county seal on the front. Dr. Carver, the lawyer began, you were appointed by this very court to evaluate the home environment of the minor child, Rebecca Whitfield. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And over the past year, you conducted multiple unannounced visits to the Whitfield residence on Red Mountain? I did. Would you share your professional findings with the court? Lillian opened the folder and started reading in that slow, syrupy voice that made everything sound like gospel. On March 12th, I observed Mrs. Whitfield shouting at the child for spilling milk, using language inappropriate for a minor. On May 3rd, Mrs. Whitfield appeared confused about the day of the week and left the stove burner on unattended. On August 21st, she exhibited signs of agitation and memory lapse, severe enough that the child had to remind her to pick up a prescription. Every word landed like a hammer on Maggie's heart. She remembered every single day Lillian was talking about. The day Caroline's birthday fell on, the day the headache medicine made her foggy, the day she'd burned her hand on that stove because she was crying too hard to notice. But she'd never shouted, never forgotten, and she, sure as heaven, had never needed an 8-year-old to mother her. The gallery murmured, heads shook. A woman behind Maggie whispered, "Lord, I had no idea Miss Maggie was that bad off." Maggie felt the walls closing in. She wanted to stand up and scream that it was all lies, but she knew in her bones, that screaming right now would only prove their point. Lillian kept going. In my professional opinion, Mrs. Margaret Whitfield suffers from early-onset dementia and emotional volatility that poses a clear and present danger to the minor child's well-being. It is my recommendation that custody be immediately transferred to Judge Raymond Whitfield, who has demonstrated stability, financial security, and a suitable new maternal influence. She closed the folder with a soft, final snap. Buddy McElroy looked over his glasses at Maggie, with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been soaked in 30 years of bourbon and backslapping. "Mrs. Whitfield, do you have counsel present?" Maggie stood, her knees shook, but her voice didn't. "No, sir, I couldn't find a lawyer willing to take the case." A ripple went through the courtroom, half sympathy, half satisfaction. The story was writing itself. Poor old Maggie, losing her mind. No lawyer in Alabama brave enough to go against a sitting judge. Buddy nodded like a man who'd already made up his mind 6 months ago. "Very well. The court will hear closing statements after lunch recess. We'll reconvene at 1:30. The gavel came down. Maggie felt the floor tilt. 1:30. 3 hours and then Becca would be gone. As the crowd started filing out, Raymond finally looked at her. For the first time in weeks, he smiled, small, cold, victorious. Lillian leaned over and kissed him on the cheek, right there in open court, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Maggie clutched Becca's hand so tight the child whimpered. She looked down into those serious green eyes, Caroline's eyes, and whispered, "It's gonna be all right, baby." But the lie tasted like rust in her mouth, because unless the good Lord reached down and worked a miracle before 1:30, the next time that gavel fell, Maggie Whitfield was going to lose the last piece of her daughter she had left. And somewhere in the back row, 8-year-old Becca squeezed her rag doll tighter and felt the hard plastic corner of that big old Panasonic tape recorder pressing against her ankle where nobody had thought to look. The courthouse cafeteria smelled like boiled cabbage and yesterday's coffee, but Maggie couldn't swallow a bite. She and Becca sat at a little metal table in the corner while the whole room pretended not to stare. Becca swung her legs and hummed "Jesus Loves Me" under her breath, same way she did when the thunder scared her. Maggie kept smoothing the child's braids over and over. Like if she stopped, the world would spin off its axis. At 1:25, the bailiff stuck his head in. "Whitfield Matter, courtroom 3, let's go, folks." Maggie stood up, took one last look at the little yellow dress and the rag doll, and walked back down the marble hallway that suddenly felt a mile long. Every step echoed like a countdown. They filed back in. The gallery had grown. Word had spread through downtown like wildfire. Ladies fanned themselves with church bulletins. Men loosened their ties. Everybody waiting for the final act of the saddest show in Birmingham. Judge McElroy took the bench again, face redder than before lunch. Whether from bourbon or shame, nobody could tell. He cleared his throat twice. "Before we hear closings," he said, voice booming, "the court will allow Dr. Lillian Carver a brief addendum to her testimony." Lillian rose again, cool as January, and walked back to the witness chair like she owned the building. She carried a single photograph, blown up to poster size on an easel the bailiff set up beside her. Maggie's stomach dropped clean to her Sunday shoes. The picture was Maggie, taken through the kitchen window 2 weeks ago, standing at the sink with her back to the camera, shoulders shaking, one hand over her mouth. The counter was a wreck. Dishes piled high, milk carton tipped over, flour on the floor. You couldn't see her face, but to anybody looking, it was plain the old woman had finally lost it. "Your Honor," Lillian said, sweet as pecan pie. This image was captured during an unannounced welfare check. Mrs. Whitfield was observed sobbing uncontrollably while the minor child attempted to comfort her. The child had to turn off the stove herself. This is the environment Rebecca has been living in. It is unsafe, unstable, and frankly heartbreaking. A collective sigh rippled through the gallery. One lady in the back actually started crying into her handkerchief. Maggie felt the room tilt. She remembered that morning clear as day. Raymond had come in early, told her he was selling the house out from under her, moving to the Caymans with someone who still had some life left in her. He'd laughed when she cried. He'd left the mess on purpose and snapped the picture himself through the window. She hadn't even known he was there. But how do you prove that to a room full of people already nodding along? Lillian stepped down, smoothing her skirt, and gave Raymond the smallest, smuggest smile. The young lawyer from Montgomery stood for closing. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Financial records show Mrs. Whitfield has made extravagant purchases far beyond the household budget. Receipts attached. Dr. Carver's professional evaluation is unimpeachable, and this photograph speaks for itself. Judge Raymond Whitfield is ready, willing, and able to provide the stable, loving home his granddaughter deserves. We ask the court to grant the divorce, award sole custody to the plaintiff, and approve the immediate removal of the child from the current residence." He sat down. The room went dead quiet. Judge McElroy picked up his gavel, looked straight at Maggie with something that might have been regret, if it hadn't been 30 years too late, and opened his mouth to speak the words that would end her world. That's when the big double doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open, slow and deliberate, like somebody wanted every head to turn. Every head did. Standing there in her little yellow dress and scuffed white sandals was Becca, all alone, no adult anywhere near her, hugging that battered Panasonic tape recorder to her chest like it was the most precious thing she owned. The gallery sucked in one giant breath. Raymond shot to his feet so fast his chair crashed backward. "Rebecca, get back to the clerk's office right now." Judge McElroy's gavel hovered mid-air. "Young lady, this is highly irregular." Becca didn't move an inch. She took one step, then another, down the long aisle between the benches. Her Mary Janes went click, click, click on the marble, loud as gunshots in the silence. Maggie's heart started pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Becca stopped right in the center of the courtroom, looked up at the judge with those clear green eyes that belonged to a little girl who'd already buried her mama, and said in the sweetest, steadiest voice you ever heard, "Your Honor, I got something everybody needs to hear before you take me away from my Grammy." Then she held that tape recorder up high, both hands trembling but strong, like she was offering the whole room the truth on a silver platter. And in that one heartbeat, every person in the place, from the judge to the janitor, knew the story they thought they understood was about to come apart at the seams. The air in that courtroom went so still you could have heard a moth land on the Bible. Becca stood there in the middle of the aisle, 8 years old going on 80, hugging that big grey Panasonic like it weighed 100 pounds. The little red record light had long since gone dark, but every grown-up in the room knew whatever was on that tape was about to change everything. Judge McElroy's gavel hung in the air like it had forgotten how to fall. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Child," he finally managed, voice cracking like a 14-year-old boy's, "you know you're not supposed to be in here." Becca didn't flinch. She took 3 more steps until she was standing right in front of the bench, close enough that the judge could see the strawberry jam still on one of her wrists from breakfast. "I know, sir," she said, polite as Sunday school, "but Grammy didn't do none of the things they're saying. And I got proof." Somebody in the back row let out a little "Lord have mercy" that sounded half prayer, half popcorn crunch. Raymond's face had gone the color of week-old oatmeal. He took 1 step toward her, hand out like he could snatch the recorder away by sheer meanness. "Rebecca Caroline, you put that thing down and march yourself." "No, sir." Becca's voice cut through his like a straight razor through silk. She didn't raise it, she didn't need to. The whole room heard the steel in it. "You told me little girls should be seen and not heard. Well, today I'm gonna be heard." Maggie's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might bust clean out of her chest and land on the floor beside her pocketbook. She wanted to stand up, wanted to run to her granddaughter, wanted to shield her from every staring eye and every ugly word that had already been said. But something in Becca's face, something fierce and shining and so much like Caroline at that age, kept Maggie glued to her seat. Dr. Lillian Carver half rose from her chair, skirt riding higher than was decent, lips pressed into a thin red line. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. The child has clearly been coached." "Sit down, Dr. Carver," Judge McElroy snapped, surprising everybody, including himself. He leaned over the bench, voice softer now, talking to Becca like she was the only person in the room. "Honey, do you understand what you're doing right now?" Becca nodded once. "Yes, sir. I understand if I don't do this, they're going to take me away from Grammy and put me on an airplane with you-know-who." She jerked her little chin toward Lillian without ever looking at her. "And Grammy'll die of a broken heart, and it'll be my fault for keeping quiet." A gasp rippled through the gallery like wind through wheat. Maggie felt the tears start then, hot and helpless. She pressed both gloved hands over her mouth to keep the sob inside. Judge McElroy sat back slow, the way a man does when he realizes the floor under him just turned to ice. He looked from Becca to Raymond, whose hands were now clenched so tight the knuckles had gone white, to Lillian, who suddenly looked a lot less sure of her lipstick, and then to the bailiff. "Mr. Bailey," he said, voice steady but shaking at the edges, "take that recorder from the child and bring it here." The bailiff, big man, former Alabama linebacker, walked over like he was handling nitroglycerin. He knelt so he was eye level with Becca. "It's okay, sugar," he whispered. "I got it." Becca let him take the weight. For the first time, her little arm started to tremble. She looked straight at Maggie then, and Maggie saw it. The fear, the love, the absolute certainty that whatever happened next, she had done what she came to do. The bailiff carried the recorder up the steps and set it on the corner of the judge's bench, like it was the Ark of the Covenant itself. The whole courtroom leaned forward as one body. Judge McElroy stared at the machine a long second, then he looked down at Becca again. "Young lady, did you record something on here that you believe the court needs to hear?" "Yes, sir. It's from 2 nights ago when Grammy was at prayer meeting. I hid in the hall closet, 'cause I heard Papa come home early with her. She didn't say Lillian's name, she didn't have to. I pressed record and left the door cracked just enough." Another gasp, louder this time. Raymond made a sound like a bull about to charge. "This is absurd. That child doesn't know how to work." "Raymond," Judge McElroy thundered, and the name cracked across the room like the gavel never had. "You will sit down and you will be silent, or I will have you removed in cuffs right now. Do you understand me?" For the first time in 25 years on the bench, Raymond Whitfield sat down without a word. The judge turned back to the bailiff. "Thread it up, Tom. Let's hear what the little girl's got." Tom's hands shook a little as he opened the cassette door, found the reel-to-reel adapter the court used for evidence, and threaded the tape with the carefulness of a man defusing a bomb. The room went so quiet Maggie could hear her own heartbeat, and the soft rustle of Becca's yellow dress as she walked back to stand beside her grandmother. Maggie reached out blind, found that small warm hand and held on like it was the only solid thing left in the world. The bailiff pressed play. For one long, terrible second there was nothing but the soft hiss of blank tape. Then a man's voice, drunk, laughing, cruel, filled every corner of that courthouse, and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. And what came out of that little plastic box next was about to turn Birmingham upside down. The first voice that spilled out of those little speakers was Raymond's, thick with bourbon and victory. "You think the old woman suspects anything yet?" He laughed, the same laugh Maggie used to love when he came home from court, telling stories about outsmarting slick lawyers. Only now it was ugly, mean, like a stranger wearing her husband's skin. Lillian's younger voice answered, low and cat-satisfied. "Raymond, honey, Margaret still thinks you're at the Elks Lodge. She's shelling butter beans and humming hymns. By the time she figures it out, the house will be sold. The money's already in the Cayman's account under my name, and we'll be sipping rum on a beach while she's crying on that porch." A woman in the third row let out a sound like somebody had punched her in the stomach. Somebody else whispered, "Lord Jesus!" The tape kept rolling. Raymond again, louder now, slurring just enough to make it worse. 15,000 to you under the table for that report, Lillian, and it was worth every penny. Early-onset dementia. Hell, I almost believed it myself when you read it out loud. Lillian laughed, the kind of laugh that used to make Maggie think she was just a nice lady who came to check on Becca. "And that photograph I had you take through the kitchen window? Pure gold. The judge will see her crying and think she's lost her mind. By Monday we'll have the kid, the house, everything. Little Becca'll forget her Grammy in a month. Kids are resilient." Maggie felt Becca's hand go ice cold in hers, but the child never moved, never cried. She just stared straight ahead like a soldier waiting for the next shell to drop. The courtroom had turned to stone. Grown men who'd known Raymond 30 years looked like they were watching their own daddy turn into the devil. One old bailiff had tears running down into his collar. On the tape, glasses clinked, ice rattled. Raymond's voice dropped to a nasty whisper. "And when Buddy McElroy bangs that gavel Monday, I want you right there beside me, looking respectable. After that, we'll be gone before the ink's dry. I already told the real estate woman to list the house Tuesday morning." Lillian's reply was pure honey over broken glass. "You sure the kid won't be a problem?" "Becca," Raymond snorted, "give her a new doll and a plane ticket and she'll call you Mama by Christmas. She's 8, they forget." The tape hissed, crackled, then went dead. For 3 full seconds nobody breathed. Then the room exploded. A woman in the back screamed, "That's the judge talking!" Men were on their feet shouting. A reporter in the corner was scribbling so fast his pencil snapped. The court reporter's hands froze over her machine like she couldn't believe the words she'd just typed. Judge McElroy's face had gone purple, veins standing out on his forehead like blue lightning. He looked like a man who just found out his best friend sold his soul and used the money to buy the rope to hang him with. Raymond tried to stand, mouth working like a fish on dry land. That tape's been doctored. The child... Sit down and shut your mouth!" McElroy roared, and the gavel came down so hard the handle cracked clean in two. The sound cracked across the room like God himself had spoken. 2 deputies were already moving, big men, faces hard as the limestone walls. They grabbed Raymond by the arms before he could get out of his chair. He twisted like a snake, suit jacket ripping at the seam, shouting, "This is a setup! Buddy, you know me?" "I thought I did," McElroy said, and his voice broke on the last word. Lillian was halfway out of her seat, purse clutched to her chest, eyes darting toward the side door like a cornered alley cat. The matronly court reporter, Miss Euler, who'd been there since Truman, stepped right into her path, arms folded, mean as a wet hen. "You ain't going nowhere, sugar," Miss Euler said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Sit your lying self down." Lillian opened her mouth, closed it, and for the first time looked every day of her 39 years. Up on the bench, Judge McElroy was shaking so hard the black robe rippled. He stared at the broken gavel in his hand like he didn't know how it got there, then looked straight at Becca, still standing beside Maggie, small and straight and brave as any soldier who ever wore grey. "Little girl," he said, voice hoarse, "you come on up here." Becca walked forward on legs that didn't shake once. She climbed the 2 steps to the bench like she'd been doing it all her life. When she reached the top, Judge McElroy leaned down and lifted her clean up onto the corner of his great big desk, the same way he used to lift his own grandbabies. Then he looked out over the courtroom that had gone dead quiet again and said the words nobody in Birmingham, Alabama, would ever forget. Case dismissed, petition for divorce denied with prejudice. Sole custody of Rebecca, Caroline, Whitfield awarded immediately and permanently to her grandmother, Mrs. Margaret Whitfield. And you two, he pointed the broken gavel handle at Raymond and Lillian like it was the finger of God, are under arrest for perjury, conspiracy, fraud, and anything else the grand jury wants to throw at you. Deputies, take them out of my sight. The gallery erupted again, cheers, cries, somebody shouting, "Hallelujah!" Raymond was still yelling as they dragged him past Maggie, face twisted and red, cuffs clicking shut on the wrist that used to hold her hand at football games. Lillian was sobbing now, mascara running in black rivers, heels scraping on the marble as they pulled her the other way. Maggie couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All she could do was open her arms. Becca flew off that judge's desk, yellow dress flying out behind her like a sunflower in a hurricane, and landed straight in her Grammy's lap. Maggie wrapped her up so tight you couldn't have slid a piece of paper between them, rocking and crying and laughing all at the same time, because the tape had done its work, and the good Lord had just used an 8-year-old little girl in a $10 dress to bring a crooked judge to his knees in front of the whole town. But the story wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The deputies had Raymond halfway down the aisle, cuffs flashing, shoes scraping, when the tape kept going. Tom the bailiff had never hit stop. The reel just kept turning, and out of those little speakers came a second conversation, quieter, later that same night. Everybody heard the bed springs creak, the rustle of sheets, and then Lillian's voice, low and lazy like a cat stretching in the sun. "You sure the kid didn't hear us come in?" Raymond chuckled, the sound thick and smug. Becca's room is all the way at the end of the hall, and she sleeps like the dead. Besides, I gave her one of those new Disney records. She's probably dreaming about Cinderella right now. A soft slap of skin on skin, a giggle. Then Lillian again. Tomorrow, when Buddy rules for us, I want to be sitting right up front so Margaret can watch me take her place. I've earned it, haven't I, baby? Earned it and then some, Raymond said, and you could hear the wet sound of a kiss. After the hearing, I'm taking you to the club for steaks. Then we're telling the realtor to list the house Tuesday morning. By Friday, we'll be on a plane. Little Becca'll be calling you Mama before we land in Nassau. The courtroom had gone dead still again, but this time it was a different kind of still, the kind that comes right before a storm tears the roof off. Maggie felt every eye swing back to her, but she didn't look up. She just held Becca tighter, rocking slow like she was soothing a nightmare. Up on the bench, Judge McElroy's face had gone from purple to ash grey. He stared at the tape machine like it had grown fangs. When the reel finally clicked empty, the silence was so complete you could hear the big wall clock tick. McElroy stood up so fast his chair rolled back and slammed into the panelled wall. His robe flapped open, and for the first time in 40 years on the bench, he looked every day of his 71 years. "Turn that thing off," he rasped. Tom hit stop like he was slapping out a fire. McElroy's eyes swept the room, over the reporters already scribbling like mad, over the church ladies clutching their pocketbooks, over Raymond still struggling between the deputies, mouth working but no sound coming out. Then they landed on Maggie. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, and his voice cracked wide open. "I owe you an apology bigger than this whole damn county." A collective gasp sucked every last bit of air out of the room. He stepped down from the bench, something no one had ever seen him do while court was in session, and walked straight to where Maggie sat, with Becca curled in her lap. The deputies parted like the Red Sea. McElroy stopped right in front of her, took off his glasses, and rubbed a hand over his face like he was trying to wipe away 25 years of bourbon and backslapping. "I've known Raymond since we were boys stealing watermelons off old man Crenshaw's truck," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I let friendship blind me. I was getting ready to sign papers that would have destroyed a good woman and rewarded a lie. I'm ashamed, Margaret, ashamed to my bones." Maggie looked up at him, silver hair slipping from her Sunday hat, cheeks wet but her eyes clear and steady. "Buddy McElroy," she said soft, "I've known you just as long. I forgave you the minute you let that child speak." A tear slipped down the old judge's cheek, big, surprising, and real. Then he turned to the bailiff. "Tom, get the sheriff on the phone. Tell him I want these two booked on everything from perjury to theft by deception, and add attempted subornation of a judicial officer. I want 'em in lockup before the sun goes down." Raymond found his voice then. "Buddy, you can't do this. We've got 30 years. 30 years of me looking the other way while you twisted the law like a dish rag." McElroy roared. "Take him out of my sight." The deputies hauled Raymond toward the side door. He twisted around one last time, eyes wild, spit flying. "Margaret, you'll never prove—" "I don't have to prove anything," Maggie called after him, calm as Sunday morning. "My granddaughter just did it for me." The doors slammed behind him and the sound echoed like a tomb closing. Lillian was next. She'd gone fish belly white under her makeup, mascara streaking like war paint. When the deputy took her arm, she tried to jerk away, voice climbing 2 octaves. "This is a mistake. I'm a licensed professional." "You're a disgrace," Miss Euler, the court reporter, snapped, loud enough for the back row. "And honey, your license just got revoked by the only thing that matters in this room, the truth." Lillian collapsed into hysterics as they dragged her out, heels scraping, screaming about lawyers and lawsuits and how nobody would ever believe a child over her credentials. But everybody already had. Maggie just sat there rocking Becca, humming under her breath the same lullaby she'd sung to Caroline in that very courthouse the day she was born. The gallery was on its feet now, some crying, some clapping, some shouting amen like it was revival. Judge McElroy climbed back up to the bench, picked up the broken gavel, and held it high. "This court is adjourned," he declared, voice ringing off the rafters, "and may God have mercy on any man or woman who ever tries to buy justice in Jefferson County again." The cracked gavel came down one final time, like the closing of a book nobody ever wanted to open again. But the real ending was just beginning. The doors hadn't even stopped swinging from Raymond and Lillian being hauled out when the gallery turned into pure pandemonium. Women were hugging strangers, men were slapping the railings like it was the Iron Bowl, and Alabama just scored on the last play, and somewhere in the back a deacon started singing "How Great Thou Art" in a baritone that rattled the windows. Cameras flashed so bright it looked like lightning inside the courthouse. Maggie just sat there on the front bench. Becca still curled in her lap like a kitten, both of them shaking from the inside out. Maggie's Sunday hat had slipped clean off and lay on the floor like a dead bluebird, but she didn't even notice. She was stroking Becca's braids and whispering the same thing over and over, so soft nobody else could hear. "You saved us, baby. You saved us." Judge McElroy wasn't finished. He stood up again, robe hanging open, face still red as a coal stove, and raised both hands like a preacher calling for quiet. It took a full minute for the room to settle. "Order!" he bellowed. "I said order in this court." When the last sniffle died down, he looked straight at Maggie. "Mrs. Margaret Whitfield," he said, and his voice cracked again. "Stand up, ma'am." Maggie rose slow, knees creaking, still holding Becca's hand. The whole room watched her like she was the second coming. She stood tall in her navy dress and run stockings, silver hair coming loose from its pins, and somehow looked 10 feet tall. "By the authority vested in me," McElroy said, "and with the evidence just presented on that tape, I hereby vacate every finding I was about to make. The petition for divorce filed by Raymond Whitfield is denied and dismissed with prejudice. All assets, accounts, and property remain the sole province of Margaret Whitfield and her granddaughter Rebecca. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate freeze on any offshore accounts mentioned in the recording, and the district attorney will be in this courtroom within the hour to take custody of that tape as evidence in a criminal proceeding." He paused, swallowed hard, and the next words came out rough as gravel. "And Margaret, on behalf of this court, the county of Jefferson, and every decent soul in the state of Alabama, I beg your forgiveness for what almost happened here today. You could have heard a pin drop on cotton." Maggie looked at him a long second, then gave the tiniest nod. "Already forgiven, buddy," she said, soft but clear enough for the court reporter to catch every syllable. "The Lord and I settled that part a long time ago." A cheer went up so loud the bailiff had to bang on the rail with his fist. McElroy wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his robe, something nobody ever thought they'd live to see, and pointed the broken gavel at the reporters crammed against the back wall. "Y'all write this down exactly like it happened," he ordered. An 8-year-old girl with a $10 tape recorder just proved that justice in this courthouse still belongs to the people, not the highest bidder. And if any editor tries to bury this story, I'll personally come down there and raise holy hell. The Birmingham newsman in the front row was already scribbling so fast his tablet smoked. Then McElroy did something else nobody had seen in 40 years. He stepped down off the bench again, walked straight to Becca, still standing beside Maggie like a little soldier, and got down on one knee, right there on the dusty courtroom floor. "Miss Rebecca Caroline Whitfield," he said, voice thick. "You are the bravest soul I ever met in this building, and that includes generals and governors. You come see me any time you want here. You'll never wait in a line again." Becca looked him dead in the eye and answered, "Yes, sir. But can Grammy and me go home now? I'm powerful hungry, and she makes the best grilled cheese in the world." The laughter that rolled through that room could have lifted the roof. McElroy stood up, brushed off his knee, and waved a hand. "Court's adjourned for good this time. Mrs. Whitfield, you and this child are free to go home. Deputies will escort you out the front so nobody bothers you." But Maggie wasn't quite ready to leave. She looked around at all the faces, some crying, some grinning ear to ear. And then she did something that would be talked about in beauty shops and barber shops for the next 30 years. She reached down, picked up her crumpled Sunday hat, set it back on her head crooked as you please, took Becca's hand, and walked straight up the aisle like a queen coming back to claim her throne. Folks parted like the Red Sea again, reaching out just to touch her sleeve, calling, "God bless you, Miss Maggie," and "We're proud of you, baby," to Becca. When they got to the big double doors, Maggie paused, turned around, and looked back at the bench where her husband of 38 years had sat in judgment of everybody else. Then she looked at Judge McElroy, gave him the sweetest smile you ever saw, and said, loud enough for the whole room to carry it out into the street, "Tell Raymond when you all lock him up tonight. Supper's going to be late from now on, and there won't be anybody ironing his robes anymore." And with that, Margaret Whitfield, 61 years old, silver hair slipping down, heart cracked wide open and somehow mended in the same hour, walked out of that courthouse into the October sunshine, holding the hand of the bravest little girl in Alabama. The doors closed behind them, and the cheering inside went on so long the chandelier shook. But outside, on the wide front steps, Maggie stopped under the big magnolia tree, pulled Becca into her arms, and finally let herself cry, the way she hadn't allowed herself to cry in front of a single soul, because the nightmare was over. The October sun was low and gold when Maggie and Becca stepped off those courthouse steps, and Birmingham had turned out like it was the 4th of July. Folks lined both sides of 21st Street, church ladies waving handkerchiefs, men in overalls hollering, kids perched on their daddy's shoulders just to get a look at the little girl who brought a judge to his knees with a $10 tape recorder. A deputy tried to clear a path, but the crowd pressed in gentle-like, wanting to touch Maggie's sleeve, to tell Becca she was their hero. Somebody started singing Amazing Grace, and within 10 seconds the whole street was singing it, voices rolling up the hill toward Vulcan like a wave. Maggie kept her arm around Becca's shoulders, tears still slipping down her cheeks. But now they were the good kind. She nodded thank yous and bless yous until her throat hurt, and when a reporter shoved a microphone in her face, asking how it felt to be vindicated, she just smiled that soft Maggie smile and said, "Honey, the Lord and this child did the vindicating. I'm just grateful to still have a porch to go home to." They finally made it to the old blue Plymouth parked under the magnolia. Maggie opened the back door so Becca could climb in, and there on the seat sat the rag doll and the Panasonic tape recorder the bailiff had handed back, like it was made of gold. Becca picked up the recorder, turned it over in her small hands, and looked up at Maggie with those serious green eyes. "Grammy," she whispered, "does this mean Papa's never coming home again?" Maggie knelt right there on the street, skirt pooling on the asphalt, and pulled Becca close. "Baby, your papa made some real bad choices. He's going to have to answer for those a long time. But you and me? We're going home to Red Mountain, and we're going to lock the door and make grilled cheese and tomato soup." and nobody on this earth is ever taking you away from me again. That's a promise written in the Lamb's book. Here?" Becca nodded, thumb sneaking toward her mouth the way it always did when the world got too big. Then she crawled into the back seat and hugged the recorder to her chest like a teddy bear. Maggie shut the door, walked around to the driver's side, and that's when Miss Euler, the court reporter, came running up, hat askew, waving a casserole dish covered in foil. "Margaret Whitfield, you are not leaving this courthouse without my chicken spaghetti, and I'm coming up the mountain tomorrow to sit with you, whether you like it or not." Maggie laughed, the first real laugh in weeks, and took the dish. "Euler, you bring sweet tea and we'll call it even." By the time they pulled into the driveway on Red Mountain, half the church was already there. Cars lined both sides of the street, porch lights blazing even though it wasn't dark yet. Ladies bustled in and out with cakes and hams and coconut pies stacked high enough to feed the 101st Airborne. The men had strung Christmas lights along the porch rail, even though it was only October, and somebody had tied a big hand-painted sign across the columns that read, "Welcome home, Maggie and Becca." Justice was served today, and it was delicious. Becca's eyes went wide as saucers. She'd never seen so many people happy at her house before. Maggie just stood on the bottom step a long minute, looking up at the big brick house that almost wasn't hers anymore, breathing in the smell of wood smoke and supper cooking, and love thick enough to spread on biscuits. Inside, the parlor was full of neighbors and deacons and little kids running underfoot. Somebody had put the tape recorder on the mantel like it was the Stanley Cup. Every time a new person came in, they had to hear the story again. How Becca hid in the closet. How she carried that heavy thing all the way downtown by herself on the city bus with a transfer and everything. Becca got shy after a while and slipped away to her room. Maggie found her 10 minutes later sitting on the bed, rag doll in one arm, tape recorder in the other, staring out the window at the lights of Birmingham twinkling way down in the valley. Maggie sat down beside her. "You all right, baby?" Becca nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again. "Grammy, when Papa and that lady were talking mean about you, I got so mad my stomach hurt, but I was scared to tell you. I thought maybe you'd cry more." Maggie pulled her close. "Listen to me, Rebecca Caroline. You did the hardest, bravest thing any little girl has ever done for her family. And because you were brave, Grammy gets to keep tucking you in every night for the rest of my days. That's worth every tear I got left." Becca thought about that a long time. Then she reached under her pillow and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. "I wrote Papa a letter," she said, voice small. "I was going to mail it if they took me away. But now I don't know what to do with it." Maggie took the paper like it might bite her. The writing was big and careful, second-grade spelling doing its best. "Dear Papa, I heard what you said on the tape. You were mean to Grammy and you lied. Mama is in heaven and she is sad you hurt Grammy. I love you, but I am mad too. I hope you say you're sorry someday. Love." Becca Maggie read it twice, folded it gentle and slipped it into her apron pocket. "One day when you're ready," she told Becca, "we'll decide together what to do with that letter. Could be tomorrow, could be 10 years from now. But tonight we're going to eat chicken spaghetti till we pop, and then we're going to sit on the swing and count stars till bedtime. Deal?" Becca managed a wobbly smile. "Deal." And that's exactly what they did. Long after the last car pulled away and the house finally went quiet, Maggie and Becca sat on the porch swing, wrapped in the same Afghan Caroline had crocheted when she was expecting Becca. The old tape recorder sat on the railing between them, silent now, its work done. The cicadas were singing, and somewhere down the mountain a train whistle blew low and lonely. Becca leaned her head on Maggie's shoulder and whispered, "Grammy?" "Hmm?" Today was the worst day and the best day all mixed together. Maggie kissed the top of that red head and felt the last crack in her heart seal up for good. "That's life, baby," she said. "Sometimes the worst day has to come first so the best day can find you." And under the Alabama stars, with the porch light burning bright and the whole city still buzzing about the little girl who saved her grandmother, they rocked slow and steady, two hearts beating in the same old rhythm they'd have for the rest of their days. 3 months later, on a January afternoon so warm it felt like spring had come early, just to see them smile, the big brick house on Red Mountain looked different. The porch swing had fresh white paint. The columns wore new garlands of cedar, and every downstairs window glowed with lamplight even though the sun hadn't set yet. Inside the parlor that used to be quiet as a church on Tuesday, you'd find a dozen little ones running circles around the furniture, laughing loud enough to wake the angels. Maggie had turned the whole ground floor into a daycare for grandmothers raising grandbabies. No charge, just bring a covered dish and a willing heart. The walls still held the same family pictures, but now there were finger paint masterpieces taped up beside them, and the mantel that once displayed Raymond's gavels and plaques now proudly held that battered Panasonic tape recorder like it was the finest silver. The headlines had screamed for weeks. 8-year-old's tape brings judge to justice. Grandmama's girl saves the day in Birmingham shocker. They ran the picture of Becca standing on the judge's bench, yellow dress bright as a daffodil, on the front page of the Birmingham News 3 Sundays in a row. Raymond drew 15 years in Kilby. No parole, no country club prison for him. The day the sentence came down, he sat in the defendant's chair wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on a man who used to fill out a judge's robe, like a king. He never looked at Maggie once. She wasn't there anyway. She and Becca were home baking chocolate chip cookies for the church. Lillian Carver lost her license the same week. The state board didn't even let her speak. They just read the transcript and revoked her credentials on the spot. She got 9 years, served every day of it, and came out looking 10 years older than Maggie ever had. The money came back, every dime. Turns out Raymond hadn't been quite as clever as he thought. The Cayman's account was in Lillian's name, and the judge ordered it seized faster than you can say restitution. Maggie paid off the few bills they had, fixed the roof, and put the rest in a college fund with Becca's name on it in big, bold letters. Every evening at dusk, after the last little one got picked up and the house finally settled, Maggie and Becca walked out to the porch, the way they'd done since the world turned right side up again. Maggie in her rocking chair with the creaky left arm, Becca cross-legged on the swing, kicking her feet just enough to keep it moving. The tape recorder sat on the railing between them, retired now, its red record light long dark. Sometimes neighbours driving by would slow down and wave, still wanting to be part of the miracle. Maggie always waved back, and Becca always grinned, big enough to show the gap where her front tooth used to be. One particular evening, the sky was the colour of peach preserves, and the first fireflies were coming out like tiny lanterns. Becca had been quiet a long time, unusual for her. Finally, she crawled up into Maggie's lap, all long legs and elbows now, and laid her head on the same shoulder that had carried her since the day she was born. "Grammy?" she asked, voice soft as the cedar garland brushing the porch roof. "Yes, baby. Do you think Mama's watching us from heaven?" Maggie felt the familiar ache and the familiar warmth all at once. She pressed a kiss into that red hair that still smelled like Johnson's baby shampoo. "I know she is, sugar, and I reckon she's prouder than any Mama ever was." Becca nodded, satisfied, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper, creased and soft from being carried a long time. It was the letter. The one she'd written the night everything almost ended. She held it out. "I think I'm ready now." Maggie took it gentle like it was made of butterfly wings, and together they walked to the end of the porch where the burn barrel sat. Maggie struck a kitchen match, the flame flaring bright against the dusk, and held it to the corner of the paper. They watched the words curl and blacken. "I love you, but I am mad too," turning to smoke and rising up toward the first stars. When the last spark died, Becca slipped her hand into Maggie's. "I forgave him," she said simply, "like you taught me." Maggie squeezed that hand so tight her arthritis didn't even bother her. "That's my brave girl." They stood there a long time, two silhouettes against the glow from the windows, the big house full of laughter and crayons and second chances behind them. Somewhere down in the valley a train whistle blew, long and low, the same sound that had lulled 3 generations to sleep on Red Mountain. Maggie started humming Blessed Assurance, soft and steady, and Becca joined in on the chorus, her little girl soprano weaving perfect with her grandmother's alto. The porch swing creaked, the cedars whispered, and high above them the Alabama sky spread out wide and forgiving, holding all the room in the world for healed hearts and new beginnings. Because some truths are small enough for an 8-year-old to carry in her pocket, and strong enough to set a whole family free for the rest of their days.